Did going to space change your relationship with God? I say no. And that's the people say, well, how can that be? And I say, well, my relationship with God is not based on general revelation. It's based on my relationship with Christ. The experience, though, deepened in terms of illustrations of my faith and the significance of it.
Welcome to the Creation Today show, where we bring together interviews with experts and solid Bible teaching. Your host, Eric Hovind, affirms the ultimate authority of God's Word, the truth of creation, and why it matters to you.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you're watching this today. You are going to get a little bit more of a God-sized view of planet Earth. If you are new to the Creation Today show, we are on a mission to disciple the world one person at a time by turning the stumbling blocks that keep people from seeing Jesus Christ as the Redeemer and the Creator of mankind into stepping stones on their journey to know the truth of who God is. I want to thank you guys for joining us. For those of you on social media, on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter or Rumble, I think that's all. Or our podcast listeners, thank you guys for joining us. And for those joining us on television, thank you so much for peeking into the Creation Today show. And a little bit, it's basically a Creation Today community is what we call it. We have conversations each week that are designed to disciple us to be who God has called us to be. So these weekly programs and these weekly conversations really are a blast. If you ever want to join our community, come on over to creationtoday.org and you can join our community at any time. All you got to do is partner with us for any amount you want and help us spread the gospel around the world. Hey, little shout out today. I was just in, where was that? Des Moines, Iowa, talking at the Iowa State Fair, sharing the gospel at the Iowa State Fair with a group of individuals. It was an absolute blast. And I got to meet Gary there at the Iowa State Fair. I had no idea I was going to get to meet him. He didn't know he was going to meet me. He went over to the booth, saw the information, asked about it, and they said, "Oh, Eric's here." And he's like, "What?" So Gary, thank you for saying hey to me at the Iowa State Fair and for being part of that and sharing the gospel through that. That is absolutely awesome. What an incredible opportunity that was to go out and minister. There's a camp there that I got to speak at called Testify, and they bring in speakers to teach evangelism in the morning, and then in the afternoon and evening they go share the gospel at the Iowa State Fair. You got to understand, this is not your normal fair. The Iowa State Fair has about 100,000 people every day come to this fair. So it is just packed with people right for gospel conversations. We passed out, I think between the booth and the Testify camp, they will pass out somewhere around 70 to 80,000 gospel tracts and have hundreds and hundreds of gospel conversations during that time there. So truly incredible. Really appreciate that. So Gary, thank you. The Gary with 2 R's. Yes, thank you for hanging out with me there. Really enjoyed getting to see you. Hey, it is a real honor today to welcome a guest whose journey through the cosmos has brought him face to face with the wonders of this incredible universe. And through his journey out in space, he's actually gotten a deeper faith with his creator. And so I'm really privileged to have him joining us today for the Creation Today show. I think what I'm going to do is introduce him and then just shut off my mic, shut off my camera and say, tell stories and just shut up, because that's all you want to do with guys that have had these kinds of experiences living in space for over 500 days. You just want to be quiet and listen to the stories they have to share. So ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege for me to welcome Colonel Jeff Williams. Colonel Williams, welcome to the Creation Today show, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Hello, Eric. Great to be with you today.
I feel like you are somebody who's experienced Earth kind of, I know it's even bigger than what you got, but like from heaven's perspective, I mean, wow, to experience that and then to use that for the glory of God by going around and talking to people. I thought I should go ahead at the very beginning of this though and go ahead and get the very first 2 answers out of the way that people have questions to. So if you could go ahead and answer the first 2 questions that everybody's going to have, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, I know what the questions are that are out there, so I can give those two answers. The first answer is yes, we did land on the moon. Uh, and the answer to the second question I know that's out there is no, the Earth is not flat.
Let's just go ahead and hit that right away. I love it. You do get those all the time, right?
I do, yeah, and it just tells you what in the minds of so many, what the authority of YouTube, where the authority of YouTube rests, because there are
That's
influencers out there, and they're influencing lots of people.
that would make a great show just because we're going to do a show on faith, what faith really is. And a lot of people are confused. They think they use faith like it's blind, like, well, there's no evidence, so you just have faith.
Right.
And looking at YouTube, it's like, yeah, who are you trusting? Who do you have faith in? Oh, that's good. I really like that because we have solid faith. Okay, give us a little bit about your overview. How did you get started, and how did you end up orbiting planet Earth? How many times a day did you orbit planet Earth when you were on the space station?
16 times a day.
How did you go from kid Jeff to orbiting planet Earth 16 times a day for more than 500 days? Like, what's that
Well,
journey like?
yeah, it's an amazing story of God's unfolding providence in just a life. And I like to consider myself just a normal guy. There's nothing special. I grew up on a farm, a dairy farm in Wisconsin. My horizon at the time growing up was fairly short in that environment, but it was a great way to grow up. My father was a guidance counselor when I went through high school, and he worked with the military recruiters in the area in that capacity, and that got him tours to the military academies. So I became aware of them, and so that extended my horizon. And I went ahead and applied and got accepted to West Point. Got an appointment there, entered West Point in 1976, graduating in 1980. Along the way there, I got exposed to initially just the opportunity to become a pilot, specifically a helicopter pilot. And I thought, I want to do that. And then a little bit later, I realized I loved engineering, studying engineering. And I found out that maybe I could be an experimental test pilot eventually after getting some experience. So I set that as a goal. And then in 1978, the first Army astronaut was selected. And I thought, oh, I could be in the Army as a pilot and be a contender for NASA. So all of those desires, I guess, kind of grew in my time at the Academy in the 70s. I started applying to NASA in 1985, interviewed three times over 10 years, six applications. I didn't get picked until 1996. So, and of course, there's a lot of details along the way. Not the least of which is coming to faith. So my wife and I came to faith in late 1987, coming out of a crisis in our marriage, actually. The Lord used that circumstance to bring us to faith and then immediately start growing in our faith. So I got selected in 96 with a fairly mature faith by NASA. So I entered into the job with this pretty acute sense of calling to faith, but then calling in life, and then stewarding the opportunities that the Lord would give. And I knew that that was a unique opportunity that I needed to steward carefully. And so my entire time at NASA from 1996 until early this year, I just retired from NASA in January, has been worked out with a perspective of, hey, I'm called by the Lord in this opportunity, and I need to steward that opportunity. A big part of that, of course, is recognizing the unique opportunity it is and bearing the responsibility of then using that to witness to the truth of Scripture and to glorify God and to witness to Christ and his work on the cross. So that's been my focus. You get the questions all the time. Well, there's a couple of categories of questions. One is, did going to space change your relationship with God? I say no. And that's the people say, wow, how can that be? And I say, well, my relationship with God is not based on general revelation, not based on experience. It's based on my relationship with Christ, who has revealed himself in his word, and that by grace through the power of the Spirit. So, but then I can say the experience, though, deepened in terms of illustrations of my faith and the significance of it. The other category of questions I get is how can you work in the area of science? How can you work for the organization like NASA and be a believer? The premise of that question, of course, is that it's an atheistic organization, or science is atheistic in contrast to Scripture. And that's absolutely not true. There's no conflict between true scientific endeavor and the Scripture. And everything in the Scripture is true. And if you doubt for specifically the early chapters of Genesis, then I would challenge you, well, where in the Bible do you begin to believe it? So the early chapters of Genesis are very critical to a believer because otherwise your faith can be the foundation is undermined, the foundation is weakened. So that was my perspective going in, and it has only grown with the experience. So for your viewers, I flew 4 times in space. First time in 2000, the most recent time was 2016. Every flight was dedicated to the building of the International Space Station, which still continues and will continue, for years to come. We'll see how long it goes, but it continues to go. It was an amazing journey and an honor to have my entire career kind of focused on that, because my first visit in 2000 was a 10-day visit when it was in its infancy. There was no permanent crew on board yet. We had launched the first element in 1998. I got there in 2000. I was on the third space shuttle flight dedicated to the building of the space station. And
I have some images. I have some images of some rockets taking off. Are these you taking off into space in these?
Well, these are generic pictures of launches, and I think you're looking at the one that has the space shuttle on the left and the Russian Soyuz on the right. So my first flight, I did launch on the space shuttle,
Wow.
and just an idea what that was. And of course, space shuttles are retired now, unfortunately, but the missions were dedicated. The space shuttle was dedicated for the building of a space station, and it accomplished that very well. That picture there, it's producing 7.5 million pounds of thrust, lifting off 4 million pounds of mass in that vehicle, most of which is the fuel, and that fuel is burned in less than 9 minutes to get to an orbit where you're going 17,500 miles an hour, orbiting the Earth every 90 minutes or 16 times a day. You go to the space station, and in those days, it would be about 46 hours to rendezvous, and very precisely, 0.1 feet per second dock at a docking port, maybe plus or minus an inch so you're going at that speed with that much mass to lift off. And then to dock so precisely to another vehicle going 17,500 miles an hour. Why are we able to do that? And I mean, jumping ahead, I contend it's because of the mathematical ordering of God's creation, which is a significant part of the provisioning of his creation. And we can get into more of that later. But back to the rocket picture, another interesting thing is my next 3 flights, 2006, 2009, and 2016, I launched on a Russian Soyuz, which you see on the right, from a launch pad in Kazakhstan, from the same place that Yuri Gagarin launched from, the first man in space, way back at the beginning of the space race at the height of the Cold War. So that's been a really interesting component of my whole experience, too. It is international, and the Russians are a major partner, along with Japan, Canada, and the European Space Agency.
And all of that goes good together. You guys have no problem. I mean, you've all done all this training. Is it like, or like, are you allowed to tell us? Do you get in fights in space with these guys?
We don't get in fights, and I've established some really close relationships with my international partners, and the partnership And people are wondering about the Russians all the time, the partnership with the Russians. The partnership is still very strong, even in spite of the difficulties that are going on because of the war and before that, sanctions and other geopolitical issues. Uh, we are the only positive engagement now between countries. But those three
Wow.
flights that I launched on, each your viewing audience would be interested in this too. Each of them were about 6 months long. Each of them were expedition flights to the space station. Again, 2006, 2009, and 2016. And the first one, we were about halfway through building the space station in 2006, and we resumed flying the space shuttle, resumed the assembly after the Columbia accident where we lost
Yeah.
that crew. And so, that's there's big major elements in the storyline. In 2009 and into the spring of 10, I was on board when we finished the assembly. And then in 2016, it's in its full operational mode. At that time, with a crew of 6. Now we're at a crew of 7. We have SpaceX flying. So it's an amazing endeavor. And I use it as an illustration to show two things. One, from a biblical worldview. Of course, we can talk about the science, but there's the mathematical ordering that I mentioned before. When you consider those numbers and the predictability of it, it's very predictable, the order. So God's provision in his creation not only gives us the substance, the raw materials, but it's the ordering of those materials that we can search out, explore, begin to understand. And then humanity, bearing the image of God, the creator, has been given the capacity to, one, have the curiosity to go look, and then two, explore and discover and develop. And that explains, even now, after all this history of humanity, why we can do what we do, even in space, duplicate the life support systems that are here, found on the planet, in a spacecraft off the planet, because we have been given this God-given capacity, bearing his image, to, what does Genesis 1 say? To be fruitful, to subdue this creation that he's given to us, and have dominion over it. That's the biblical foundation for all of this.
That's beautiful. So you even apply that, whether or not NASA has that in their mind, you get to apply that as a Christian and say, that's still what I'm doing, even doing this science in space.
Absolutely. And oh, by the way, NASA is nothing. It's nobody. It's the name of an organization. That organization is made up of people. And like I alluded to earlier, a lot of people think of NASA as this anti-Christian, atheistic organization because that's the way maybe the media portrays it or whatnot. But NASA actually has a lot of believers in the workforce. There are more than what people would think among the astronaut corps, and there are many engineers, technicians, and other folks within the organization that are believers. It's just like a cross section of any of the communities that we live in.
Nice. So it varies all over the place. Do you end up? I'm just thinking about that. I'm going to. Do you end up having a lot of conversations? I mean, you're with a crew up there for 6 months, or with one person for an extended amount of time. Do you guys end up trying to talk through different stuff, or is it, hey, no, we got business? Like, how busy are you? How much free time do you have up there to hang out and sip the coffee? And so, what do you think? Like, how does that go when you're up there?
Well, in a sense, it's very similar to life here. Yeah, we're very busy up there, but you have to have a balanced day-to-day activity. You can't be sprinting for 6 months. So we have a daily routine, getting up in the morning, kind of, getting freshened up, having breakfast, saying good morning to each other. And then you go your day through the day, performing the work that's been organized and assigned to each of us. Sometimes working together, other times working individually on different things. It's a huge laboratory. It's the size of a 5,000 square foot house. It's the volume inside. So there's a lot going on. But then you have a break for lunch, and then you get together for dinner. Weekends, the workload, we try to have the workload a little bit reduced, especially on Sundays. So it's a daily routine and it's a weekly routine. So sure, there's opportunity for interaction, but just like our interactions here on the planet, though, they vary individual to individual. Well, how deep those things go, and I've experienced some that have no interest in talking about spiritual things, all the way to a fellow believer on board the crew, where we're able to share scriptural devotion time, even on a couple of occasions share communion together up there, and spend some time in the Word, and contemplate what the Word says as it relates to the vantage point that we were experiencing at the time. I mean, especially God as creator, to be off the planet from that vantage point and to view all the details of it, what I would say the spiritual center of his creation, that is earth, which is made for our habitation. It gives you obviously a very rich and new perspective of that work.
So you look down at planet Earth and you're like, incredibly designed for life. Look at this. I mean, 16 times a day. And you've taken, how many photographs did you take of planet Earth while you were up there?
Well, they say that upwards of close to 500,000 photographs. So it's somewhere between 450,000 and a 500,000. By the
Wow.
way, my motivation to take the pictures was it's very difficult to capture memories, when we have especially when there's a lot going on and it's very intense, but you can capture so many memories through photography. It freezes the image. And also, I recognize that stewarding the opportunity that God was giving me, that the photography would be a way that I could come back then and bring vicariously the people that were listening or engaged vicariously to that vantage point, to consider the things that we can talk about relative to God's work of creation, especially understood through his work of redemption, right? Because we will deny him apart from that work of grace in our hearts.
Okay, I'm just looking at the slide right now showing what looks like northern
Yeah.
lights. And okay, you like
Could be
that's a
north, could be
normal thing for
south.
you up there.
It could be northern lights, could be southern lights. We see them both.
So, and that's a normal thing for you up there. It's just like, yeah, we see this kind of stuff all the time.
Well, we see it regularly. It's actually it's not always predictable. You can go by one orbit on the night side of the Earth and see this great array of aurora, like you see in the picture, and the next orbit hardly see any of it. So it's very dynamic. It's very changing, and it's difficult to predict. But regularly, if you're looking in the window, we're very busy, so no, we're not always in the window. You get opportunities like this, and of course that just adds is so much excitement to the experience.
Can't go to that next slide. We got a couple more minutes on social media. I want to hit some of these views that you've gotten and just let you talk about some of these things. What is
Yeah, this
this?
is this is river delta on the island of Madagascar. It's perhaps the most photographed river delta from off the planet by astronauts because you can see it with the naked eye, and it's very unique in its pattern. It's very unique in color, obviously from the soil that's coming down from upstream. But it's also a work of beauty. There's a beauty to this that attracts our attention, and beauty, symmetry, and harmony and color and pattern and whatnot. And it's a great example to show the artistry of God's creative work, that it has two things. There's a subjective, or I'm sorry, an objective part of it that I just described. And then the fact that we even care, the subjective part, again, is an illustration of us bearing the image of the source of beauty that is God himself.
I got Kevin, one of our partners, asking, "Can you see the Great Wall of China?"
It's funny, that I know that's written out there that the Great Wall of China is the only thing that you can see from space that's man-made. The fact is, you can see many, many things, and you can scroll through photography and see all kinds of stuff from space. I can't tell you. I have to say, I have to admit that I never positively saw the Great Wall, although I looked for
Wow.
it on occasion. primarily due to weather and how it blends into the landscape, perhaps, and also though there's just a couple of areas that have evidence of pollution on the earth, and one of them is over China, and the other's over India. So it's very difficult. You got a rare view to a clear view of the ground of China. Those are the coral reefs in the Bahamas,
Oh,
just east of Florida. Those are the most beautiful reefs in the world, and I have a collection of reefs from all over the world in my photography. And again, we see the beauty, and then ask yourself, why do I respond this way? And it gives us understanding of bearing the image of the Creator.
where do people get these images? John was wondering that. Where can they? You have a book, don't you? Have your book, The Work of His Hands with ICR, right?
Yes, I published a book. Actually, ICR carries it and promotes it. It was actually published by Concordia Publishing House in St. Louis. I was given a talk back in, I think, 2006 or 7 after my first long flight. And out of the crowd comes a gentleman, and he hands me his card and says, "I'm CEO of Concordia Publishing House. If you ever want to do a book, please call me." And there's more to the story than that, but it kind of fell in my lap. I never thought I would be able to do a book at that time, or have the opportunity, and it was dropped in my lap. So use the opportunity to put this book together. Yeah, many of the pictures that you're showing are in the book. It chronicles the 6-month flight in 2006, across the arc of activities from launch to landing. And then woven into there are the themes of God as creator, who is the provider, who has provisioned his creation, all through the lens of redemption.
What are your thoughts on this? And Jordan, on one of our partners, just asked this, and I had this question for you too. So, what are your thoughts on colonizing Mars? I was listening to one of your talks, and you're like, "Yeah, God told us to subdue the Earth. He didn't tell us." And I was like, "I've never thought He didn't tell us to subdue Mars. Maybe we should go talk to Elon and say, hey, maybe you don't understand. This is what we're supposed to be doing." What are your thoughts
Well,
on that?
well, the issue I have is with the word colonize, because that's not realistic. I think there's a good chance if we ever get the political will, because it always takes political will to fund it, and over a long time, we have a lot of technology to develop, but it's very, very likely that one day we will send a crew to Mars to explore it, but colonizing it, everything we need to sustain life has to come from Earth, and it has to be resupplied from Earth. Now, certainly we can produce some things, or maybe recycle components for life support there, develop the technology, but ultimately the source comes from Earth. So
Wow.
colonizing is kind of a foolish concept, in my opinion.
Got it. I want to ask you more questions about like where are we at? So to go from when you first applied in the 80s, where was space exploration, where we're at today with SpaceX and stuff. And I want to go through some more these images. Some of these images I'm very curious what that is, where that is, such unique places. But I need to let my social media go first. Hey, if you're joining me on Facebook or Twitter or Rumble or YouTube, or our television and podcast audience, thank you guys for tuning into a little bit of the Creation Today show. It is a joy to try to bring this information to you and help disciple you to see who God is. And that really is our goal. We want you to understand who God is. If you've never received a gift from us, I'd like to give you a gift. It's actually not even mine to give. It's God's. Go to creationtoday.org/gift, and it'll be the best message you've ever heard. It's the gospel of Jesus Christ. creationtoday.org/gift if you want to understand more. Hey, if you want to get the book, The Work of His Hands by Colonel Jeff Williams, I'd love it if you go get that. You can get that at icr.org, icr.org. And I think you'll really enjoy looking through those images. I've got to let you go next week. I've got a great show for you. Next Generation Apologetics. This summer, I did an entire, a friend of mine, Dave Glander, puts on these series of talks, these series of camps, like 6 or 7 weeks of camps. He brings young people and teaches them real practical, good apologetics in a very unique way. I said, hey, would you come on and teach us how do we pass on apologetics to the next generation? I mean, it feels like we're missing the next gen and we need to get, it's not good enough that we know it. We got to pass it on. So I'm really excited. You're going to love him. He's hilarious. Join me next week, Wednesday at noon, for Next Gen Apologetics. If you want to join the rest of this conversation, again, come on over to creationtoday.org. And thank you guys for tuning in. God bless.